Thank you so much for joining us today for this exciting webinar. My name is Harley Hiddings-Watson, and I am the facilitator for the Hydrogen Breakthrough hosted within UNIDO. And it's really my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar on ISO 19870-1, moving us towards credible, comparable global markets for hydrogen and its derivatives. The session is hosted by the Hydrogen Breakthrough under the Plan to Accelerate Renewables and Low Emissions Hydrogen and its Derivatives that was published at COP30 with the support of so many of you, really trying to advance our concrete actions towards making all of this a reality. It's in partnership with UNIDO and IPHE. And before we begin, and I hand over to our incredible speakers for the day, just a few housekeeping points. Firstly, the session is being recorded, and the recorded will be circulated to all registered participants afterwards. And secondly, I'd just like to kindly ask if all participants can remain muted throughout the sessions. There is a Q&A session at the end where you'll be able to ask any questions that you do have, and throughout from now you can already post them in the Q&A chat so that we can then get to them at the end and answer any questions that you do have. So without any further delay, I'd like to hand over to our first speaker, and it's my pleasure to introduce Petra Schwager, who is the Chief of the Climate and Technology Partnership Divisions at UNIDO, leading the global program for hydrogen in industry and hosting many of the key hydrogen initiatives that we all know and love, so has a deep understanding and vantage point on why hydrogen really needs this common yardstick. So to kick us off, please, Petra, over to you.
Thank you very much, Harley. Always a pleasure to listen to you and to work with you. Hello to everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to have you here and joining at today's Hydrogen Plan to Accelerate Solutions webinar on ISO 19871. I would also like to thank our co-organizers from IPHE, Laurent, pleasure to see you. Thank you also to the great speakers, Ivana, Cristiano, Gabriel, always pleasure to cooperate with you. I think we are at a very decisive moment for hydrogen, and with the launch of ISO 19870-1 in April, we have now an international standard that provides a common methodology to measure greenhouse gas emissions of hydrogen. And this is the first step in a broader series that will extend across the full value chain, from production to transport, conversion, and final use in products such as steel, fuels, and fertilizers. The time is crucial. As hydrogen moves from promise to reality and projects scale globally, a key question emerges. So how do we know what kind of hydrogen we are actually buying and using? How do we know that the type of hydrogen that we are buying and using actually contributes to what we all want, to reducing the greenhouse gas emissions of my operations? And today hydrogen is labeled in many ways: green, low carbon, clean. And I tell you, sometimes I really don't know what word to use when I talk about hydrogen. So I'm very pleased that finally we come to the conclusion that we talk about low emissions hydrogen. And behind all the labels that I said, that I mentioned, the methodology is not clear. So it's very good that we have a clear calculation of the emissions and that we can really report we are contributing to the climate targets. And this is not just relevant for hydrogen, but for all the products that further come out of the hydrogen and down the value chain. So, for example, how do we verify the footprint of steel made with hydrogen? How can shipping ensure that fuels deliver real emissions reductions? And how do we substantiate claims for low emission fertilizers? Without a common yardstick, markets fragment, buyers face uncertainty, and investment signals weaken. And without this, without a clear standard, global trade is also very, very challenging. I don't believe we can have a global trade without a clear standard. So it's excellent to have this new harmonized, transparent basis for measuring emissions and for facilitating a good and sustainable trade. So I wish all of us a very successful workshop and debate, and over to you, and let's start. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Petra, for setting the scene for us. And I'm now pleased to introduce our presenter for today, who for many on this topic really doesn't need an introduction, but Laurent Anthony, Executive Director of the International Partnership for Hydrogen and Fuel Cells in the Economy, IPHE. Laurent has really been at the center of the international architecture for hydrogen standards and certification for so long, and IPHE a key partner in shaping this ISO. So there's no better person to present this to us. And please, Laurent, take it away.
Thank you. Good. Hello, and thank you very much, Harley, for your very kind words. I will share my screen, and I hope you can see it. So, as mentioned today, I will present this new standard, ISO 19870-1. And of course, I have the pleasure to present it, but it's not only my work, it's really a teamwork, and which has started many years ago. And now they're gathering more than 100 people working together. So it's a really nice teamwork. So for the presentation today, here's the outline. Why, and Petra already nicely mentioned why we need such kind of standards. And then I will present the standard first as a glance to have a global picture, then to deep dive more in the methodology, while also presenting the different pathways, production pathways we've considered. And as mentioned, why also did we develop this standard and how we can be seen as a value for industry before concluding. But maybe first, as you mentioned, IPHE, I don't know if it's very well known by everyone, but just one slide. What is IPHE? IPHE is a government-to-government partnership gathering now 27 countries from the 5 continents and the European Commission. More than 23 years ago, it has been created, and we just released 1 month ago our annual compendium where we have a link, and you can, of course, connect in order to see what we've developed. So what is the I would say the objective of the IPHE is really to see that when governments are working together on specific topics, how it can support the development of a hydrogen economy. And here you see the main topics we're working on: greenhouse gas emissions. This is the topic of today, but certification, trade are really connected. And also, if we want to develop a new industry, a new economy, we also need to have a very high skilled workforce. So that's why skills is also something we have to take care of. And all these reports are freely available on the IPHE website. So, as mentioned by Petra at the beginning, if we are developing a standard, it's not for the pleasure to develop that standard, but as mentioned, it's really to ensure that we will facilitate the hydrogen trade. And the idea is at the end that even hydrogen can be seen as a commodity, as natural gas or oil. And to do so, then we really need to go from local markets to global markets, and then to develop the trade of low emissions hydrogen. And as mentioned by Petra, yes, just forget colors. I think we are now old enough to move from color books to read and write. And to ensure that we are trading low emissions hydrogen, then of course the idea is to certify that it is really low emission hydrogen that we are trading. And of course, one of the main elements to ensure that it is low emissions hydrogen is to have its carbon footprint. And here you see directly the importance of the standards we will discuss today, how to quantify this carbon footprint or the greenhouse gas emissions quantification of hydrogen along the whole supply chain. And this may then, of course, facilitate trade of certified hydrogen. But where are we today? As you know, 1% is only low emission so far. And today also, I think the Global Hydrogen Review should be published, where we see numbers are improving, but we still have a long journey to go, but it goes in the right direction. So, and regarding certification, this is another topic. And maybe just one slide, because if you're interested in, next week, IPHE will organize a webinar to provide information about the updated report assessing and comparing 21 certification schemes, 7 support mechanisms, and to see what is common, what is different, and what may be the way forward in order to facilitate mutual recognition of certification schemes. You have the QR code for registration, and you are more than welcome to register and to attend this seminar next week. So, What was the approach? Why? And here I think Harley Hines-Watson is very well placed because she was part of COP28 presidency in the UAE. And for hydrogen, I think it was a quite historical moment as we had this ministerial meeting with, in particular, this declaration of intent where 37 countries agreed to move toward mutual recognition of certification schemes. And the overarching approach was the following, as you can see on this slide. First, ensure that we are speaking a common language, then to develop technical recommendations, and to agree on harmonized underlying methodologies. And of course, once we're speaking the same language, using common methodologies, then of course we need also to establish a common understanding between governments on certification mechanisms. And that's why these actions have taken over these years. First, we developed a hydrogen certification 101 paper to speak the same language, and then, of course, to develop harmonized underlying methodologies, and in particular ISO standards on conformity assessment or auditing management systems already existing, but one was missing, it's a methodology to quantify the greenhouse gas emissions. And that's why we've started that. And after, of course, we also need to discuss about this mutual recognition IPHE is now going on. Covering. So the core challenge, as mentioned by Petra at the beginning, is of course, once you have the same molecule, you have the same physico-chemical properties, but you may have very different greenhouse gas carbon footprints. And so how can you justify, certify that the hydrogen we call low emissions is really low emissions? And if we are not doing that, we also may create some market fragmentation or even market distortion. And that's why we really need to agree on the carbon footprint of the hydrogen we are producing and using. And the last point also is co-product allocation. As you also know that when we are producing hydrogen is not always the only product. And so we may have different products. And then what is the carbon allocation that will be used in order to give some carbon footprints to each of these species produced at the same time. And this is something which might be seen as quite easy, but in fact is far from a gift. And so that's why the ISO 19870-1 provides, I would say, a single internationally agreed methodology. You will see we are covering 9 production pathways with additional normative annexes on the hydrogen purity, but also feedstocks used to produce that hydrogen. We are defining a clear system boundary. We agreed on a functional unit, and also we could agree on harmonized allocation and cutoff rules. And one important point for the people working on the life cycle assessment, LCA, this ISO standard is not starting from scratch, but it is really based on the ISO 14067, which has been developed by the ISO Technical Committee 207, Subcommittee 7, developing all these life cycle assessments standards, and the 14067 deals with the life cycle assessment of products. And so we, by this standard ISO 19870-1, we have just, I would say, mentioned specificities linked to hydrogen, but based on this global 14067 standard. So the history of that standard, as mentioned, there was many people working on the topic, and for many years. In fact, the work has started in January 2020 at IPHE. There was a specific task force created at that time with the colleagues, France, European Commission, and the US. And here you see in July 2023, we delivered our version 3 of this guideline. And as IPHE is not a standardization body, the idea was from the beginning, once we are ready, to hand it over to the ISO. And here I think we need to pay tribute to Andrei Chuvalev, that he was really supportive of this activity, and to take as chair of the subcommittee 1 of the ISO TC197 on the hydrogen technologies, to take the IPHE document and to create a specific working group to develop an ISO standard. And in less than 1 year, we could go from the IPHE guideline to the ISO technical specification that we published for the COP28. And from this technical specification, then we moved to go to international standards, IS. And the first, -1, dealing with hydrogen production, has been published, as mentioned by Petra, just 2 months ago. So this is this ISO 19870-1. So what is this standard at a glance? At a glance, you see the number, it's the first edition. You need to know that all the ISO standards may be revised every 3 to 5 years. At least we are checking if there is some revision needed. So it's not the final version, it's the first one, 2026. It has also been produced under the so-called Vienna Agreement, which means also agreed by Europe. So it's now an EN ISO standard. And the scope is really the hydrogen production from raw material extraction up to the production gate. And I would say we mentioned that normative reference based on the ISO, mainly ISO 14067. And it's part of a series. So this is part 1, this document on raw material to production gate. But then, of course, if you want to use hydrogen, the hydrogen has to be transported from the production gate to the consumption gate. And this can be done by different manners. It can be either by using gaseous or liquid hydrogen, or ammonia, or liquid organic hydrogen carriers, LOHC. You may say that one piece is missing is methanol. It's open if there is any industrial interest that anyone can propose to its national standardization body a new working proposal to consider methanol as part 5. So what is inside? Today, the standard is, we'll deep dive a little later on this production, but then for the others, it covers, as mentioned, from the delivery at production gate to the consumption gate. And here the -2 considers all the transport conditioning of gaseous hydrogen and liquefaction, transport of liquid hydrogen, gasification, vaporization of this liquid hydrogen to be stored and then delivered. This is -2. -3 deals with ammonia, where you have ammonia production, transport, and cracking or conversion back to hydrogen before the consumption of hydrogen. And here I have to stress that this standard has been developed commonly with the Ammonia Energy Association, which was convener of this working group, which means that the ammonia industry agreed also with these standards. So normally we will only have one standard regarding ammonia, and it will be this ISO 19870-3. I think it's a quite important point to be mentioned. And finally, -4 deals with liquid LOHCs. Here also hydrogenation, transport, dehydrogenation before going back to the consumption gate. And these 3 standards are at the draft international standard stage, and then you have the process below, so it's almost the last one. And these 3 DIS have been approved in April. Last week we had a meeting, three days meeting, 1 day for each, where we discussed all the comments received. And now in the next weeks we should move to the ISO Secretariat to start this final draft international standard for 8-week ballot, where only editorial comments can be provided, which means that we hope that between September and October this year, we will have the 3 remaining international standards published. So the full series should be available before COP31. So let's deep dive a little in this -1 standards. So as mentioned, it is important to define the system boundary. And here we are considering from raw material extraction up to production gate, which means that you need to take into account any emissions, greenhouse gas emissions related to the extraction of your feedstocks, the transport, it's transport, and then of course all the emissions corresponding to the hydrogen production process, and also then to the production, up to the production gate. Something new, we also included in this standard CapEx emissions. I think you won't find in any usual standards LCA approach CapEx emissions as a standard. And here we said, no, we really need to be really transparent and also to include CapEx emissions. But as we have also to be, I would say, comparable with other species, electrons, or the molecules, we could not integrate that directly as normative. But as we wanted to start at least evaluating the value of these CapEx emissions, that's why it is mandatory to provide CAPEX emissions values for information. After, it will be up to the consumer, to the customer, to decide if he will or not take into account these CAPEX emission in his own evaluation. So this is something new, and we just, I would say, asking or hoping that now this inclusion of CAPEX emissions will become standard for everyone. Functional unit and reporting metric. Here, what we decided is to, as a functional unit, is 1 kilogram of hydrogen at specified pressure and purity at the production gate. And here you see that we are not writing 1 kilogram of H2, but of hydrogen, because we make a difference. H2 means the molecule of hydrogen, whereas hydrogen is the product, and the product can contain impurities. And so we decided that if the purity of hydrogen is over 99.9 mole %, we consider it is pure hydrogen. If not, then you have to refer to Annex A regarding the purity, and where we propose to take into account the impact of these impurities on the greenhouse gas emissions. And regarding the evaluation basis, here also it's the usual approach from the ISO 14067 is to apply this attributional approach, which means that we are only considering the emissions within the system boundary of the product. So this classical approach, which means that any emissions happening outside the product system boundary cannot be supported by the hydrogen product. But depending on the regulations you want to comply with, you have to extend this system boundary beyond the pure system boundary of the product. And this is what we call a consequential approach, where you will define your system boundary regarding the regulations, or I would say the requests from your customers, which has been defined. And regarding also allocation, if you are using system expansion via substitution to allocate or to avoid co-product allocation, this is also considered as a consequential approach. So here, this is something we also succeeded to introduce. Attributional approach is quite well defined, and we need to follow it. But consequential approach, as the system boundary, there is no unique system boundary, but the unique system boundary has to be defined depending on the purpose for what you're using this standard. We are only providing recommendations, informative information to help the user of these standards to apply this consequential approach. And regarding the emissions inventory, so of course, the total greenhouse gas emissions consider the feedstock supply, as mentioned. And here you will see we're considering either natural gas, coal, biomass, water, brine, naphtha. The idea is really to be as broad as possible for the main production pathways. And we need, of course, to include all the emissions due to the extraction, the processing, but also the transport of these feedstocks to the hydrogen production plant. And then we also need to take into account direct emissions from the process, but also fugitive emissions, in particular methane leaks, venting, flaring, and other emissions from chemical reactions. And the process energy used, in particular the electricity, which can be either defined with using a location-based or market-based approach. But the same to consider any steam, heat, or cold you may have purchased, or also all the energy you have used to produce on-site all your electricity, for instance. And others, in particular, we also need to include the waste treatment and disposals, but also all the greenhouse gases, and include also the water treatment processes, so that as the water that we're using has also a carbon footprint. And here I also have to add that we take a particular care about methane emissions, and in particular not only as direct emission at the process, but also at the feedstock, which means that in order to define the emission factor of your natural gas, we have defined a priority order. And this priority order is to use the emission factor of the well you are using. If this value is not available, then you have to use the emission factor of the basin of this well. And this is also not available, then you may use the national average value, and all these values have to be auditable. So it's not you just provide the value, no, this has to be audited, and that we can really trust in the value you are using. And finally, you can also do some CCS. And then if you store hydrogen, there is also mentioned some existing ISO standards, and it's only if you are really storing, if it is a geological sequestration. And of course, you have to take into account all the emissions linked to the, I would say, purification, conditioning, transport, and sequestration of that CO2. And this will be allocated to the hydrogen and hydrogen co-products. Regarding emissions allocation, this is a quite important point. And here we also agreed on a priority of arching hierarchy. First, to avoid allocation if we can, and this in particular by subdivided processes. And also, as mentioned, system expansion via substitution, but this is considered as a consequential approach and not as an attributional approach. If you cannot, or after, if you have to go a step further, then we prefer physical allocation, which means either by energy content, by mass, by mole, by enthalpy. And if this is not possible, then as last resort, then you may use some economic allocation. So this may be one of the main difference you may see with, for instance, the European delegated acts, where economic allocation can be used even at that second step and not at the third step. Cut-off criteria, we agreed that the total value has to be lower than 50 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of hydrogen. So this, sometimes you can use percentages, but here we agreed on this value in order that, regarding, I would say, also the values of the thresholds which have been defined in different jurisdictions. And then, of course, data quality requirements, but this is quite, I would say, usual for any LCA approach, so I won't take more time to discuss this. And then, what are the production pathways we've used? So 9 production pathways. Here you see methane reforming, either steam methane reforming or autothermal reforming, with or without CCS, water electrolysis, chloralkali process, steam cracking, and gasification, methane pyrolysis. Really, I would say, new under development is chemical looping water splitting. Geological hydrogen has also been considered from now, as it is a more and more, I would say, studied topic, and catalytic naphtha reforming in refineries. And I just give one example, the example of the most used today, methane reforming with or without CCS. Here you see, of course, what you have to take into account is all the direct emissions regarding combustion, fugitive process, but also all the feedstock upstream. And here we have agreed to allocate the different co-products by energy content. Regarding water electrolysis, here we agreed as allocation of co-products, because for electrolysis, you may have oxygen as a co-product. So if you are valorizing the oxygen, you have to allocate, and we agree to allocate by mole. But if you are not, if you are just venting or burning your oxygen, then of course, all the greenhouse gas emissions have to be attributed to the hydrogen and not to oxygen, as it is considered as a waste. But here then we agreed on more. And other normative pathways, chloralkali, which is also one way to produce hydrogen if it is only, I would say, less than 3% or 8% of the output. But here we agreed also to use a mass allocation. On steam cracking, also mass allocation has been approved. For gasification with or without CCS, here we need to, there are different ways depending on the, I would say, sub-process you are considering. Methane pyrolysis, we agreed also to have a mass allocation. For chemical looping, also it's more energy allocation. And for geologic hydrogen, where you may have, for instance, either helium in addition to hydrogen, or you may have also some nitrogen, here we agreed to allocate by more. And for catalytic naphtha reforming, energy content has been adopted for allocation. So you see, we could agree, and it was not, I would say, the easiest, but it was a very nice result. We could agree on the allocation method for each of these 9 production pathways. And to stay on time, now I would say, what is the value for industry? And I think this will be part also, Ivana will, I think, present that much better than I will. But I think why adopting this ISO standard, we really see that it's a must. We were waiting, the whole industry, hydrogen industry and stakeholders were waiting for this standard to facilitate market access and trade, to facilitate comparisons, to also, if it is used in different regulations using the same way to quantify the greenhouse gas emissions, it can also support regulatory compliance. And we are all convinced that it contributes to transparency, to trust, but also to give trust to not only to the producers, to the users, but also to investors. And in particular, by adding this CAPEX emission, really adds some rigor that we want to be as transparent as possible. And by using the same standard, may also what we also tried is to work on, as mentioned, methane leakages, grid emissions. So we tried that to support also other standards to maybe to use the same approach. And as mentioned, it's the first edition. It's not written in, it's not for forever. It will be revised. It will be improved over time, but at least now it exists. And here, this standard is now it starts to be referenced in different national regulations. As for instance, here in India, there is an explicit normative fallback reference that if production pathways are not defined in the certification system of India, then you have to refer to the ISO TS. So of course, most of the texts are referring to the technical specification from 2023, as the IS standard is only 2 months old. For the AO, it's not referenced, but it's not I would say, misaligned. There are some specificities, but we cannot say we are misaligned. In the UK, the last version of the low carbon hydrogen standard, it is methodologically aligned, even there is no explicit citation. Same for Australia. The US, they are using the Grid 45V model, and the ISO is not mentioned so far. But we need to keep in mind that this COP28 declaration of intent signed by 37 countries, even if it was not binding, agreed to apply and to use harmonized standards, technical standards, as yes, something we need also to keep in mind. This ISO standard is a voluntary technical standard. So you may or may not apply it. It's not a law. And we know that some countries like Brazil, Japan, Korea, the United Arab Emirates are working on and should use, or at least be consistent with this ISO standard. And as we know, it's under the breakthrough agenda with other, I would say, breakthrough agenda topics. This standard can also be used and can be helpful for cross-industry relevance. In particular, here I'm mentioning 6 different industries where you can use, and you may have to use, you will use hydrogen methodology, of course, for this DRI. And then, of course, the idea, if you want to have the carbon footprint of the whole of the steel you are producing, if hydrogen is part of it, we need to ensure interoperability between what we've done in hydrogen and how it is accounted for the steel industry. And the same for ammonia and fertilizers. But here, as mentioned from the beginning, with the -3, the greenhouse gas emissions for ammonia will or should apply -1 plus -3. And this should facilitate introduction with ammonia production. But then, of course, we need also to discuss to see how it can be used when we are producing fertilizers. Same for chemical and refining industries. The same also for aviation, e-fuels, SAF, for instance, also to see how hydrogen is only a small part of this whole, I would say, value chain of e-fuels, of SAF, for maritime shipping and these kind of fuels. And the main point is really to ensure we can have interoperability between these ISO standards and how the carbon footprint is evaluated in all these 6 industries. And finally, one way also to ensure interoperability, to share data, and this is something that we are continue to work at the IPHE level, is really to support the development of a digital product passport. The first mentioning of this DPP was in the IEA report in 2024. And the idea is really now to use this DPP to provide all the data you need, either for reporting, but also to be certified. And there are already some digital product passports for hydrogen under development. Here I just show one example, which has been developed in the United Emirates between Mazda and M Steel, but there are others. And the idea is now to move forward and to see the same mapping assessment. And I think this might be one of the next also webinar organized by IPHE, but it's a nice way, I would say, to ensure this interoperability and to transfer data, to transfer certificates in a secure manner. And to finalize, I would say the key takeaways. I hope that you can read that now this is really the first international standard where we can quantify the greenhouse gas emissions for hydrogen production. We are covering 9 normative production pathways. We try to have consistent and comparable results, and to be as rigorous and transparent as possible. And in particular, we could agree on the allocation hierarchy and allocation method to be used for each of these 9 production pathways. And we hope that by using more and more these ISO standards, it will support to have a market and a regulatory alignment, which will really facilitate the emergence of a hydrogen trade. So with that, thank you for your attention. And I give you the floor back, Harley.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I see a lot of clapping, and I extend that as well, for really that comprehensive walkthrough, giving us all here a much better understanding of what it really means for measuring emissions across the beginning of the hydrogen value chain, with the rest to come. So now what does that mean in practice? Laurent gave us a little insight. But when we're at such a pivotal moment in the hydrogen industry, in really driving it into that reality, we're really fortunate to have our next speaker, Ivana Yemelkova, the CEO of the Hydrogen Council, really representing the global hydrogen industry, and here to give us that vital perspective. So please, Ivana, over to you.
Thank you so much, Harley, and thank you all. It's really great to be here with you. And let's start by acknowledging that this webinar has been impeccably timed, because today is a big day in the hydrogen world. Just this morning, the International Energy Agency published its Global Hydrogen Review, the must-read, the authoritative study from a government standpoint on what's happening in hydrogen. And if you have not yet had the chance to explore it, I highly encourage you to do so, because the report acknowledges how far we've come, which is very refreshing to see, but it also issues some stark warnings on what we need to do in order to continue that growth trajectory. And policy, regulatory clarity, predictability, and standards are obviously a key part of what will enable that future growth. So let me start by saying thank you again to Laurent, Anthony, and the experts of the ISO Technical Committee 197, as well as the colleagues in the subcommittee 1, SC1, for all the hard work. It has taken many hands, many eyes, many brains to get us where we are. And Laurent, I want to thank you also for mentioning our late colleague, Dr. Andrei Chubelev, and his role in this effort as one of the founding fathers, so to speak. It's always a wonderful opportunity to honor his legacy. Now, you have already outlined very clearly why this is transformative. From the perspective of the industry, this standard allows us to answer a question that has been persistent in conversations around hydrogen, and that is, how clean is this hydrogen really? And now we finally have a means to answer it in a manner that is consistent, that is based on very credible, sound, and mutually recognized methodology that is truly comprehensive from a life cycle standpoint. So I think for us, it's extremely clear how this changes the conversation around hydrogen. As my colleague, I think she's here, Daria Nochevnik, put it, now you can take a ton of hydrogen produced in Rotterdam or Riyadh or Santiago or Sydney and compare them like to like. So I think that is really absolutely fundamental. And what comes with transparency is trust. And what comes with trust is trade. And I think this is really what allows the global industry to embrace this standard and make sure that it builds the foundation of that next chapter of growth. Now, I will highlight one more item that Laurent, you alluded to, and that is that this standard is a voluntary standard. So the standard is only as powerful in its impact as is its adoption. And for that, we can all help. We can all help make sure that this standards really becomes part of the conversation and a clear reference point that brings us all together. So I will use my time to effectively issue a little call to action to you all. Number one, please go to the website, the ISO website, and perhaps we can put a link in the chat. I know you had some in your presentation, Laurent. Download it. Literally, the first step you can make today is download it, and to make sure that you share it with colleagues, with your organization, and really familiarize yourself with what's in it and start using it as a reference. The second point I would like to invite you all is really share it. Share it not only within your organization, but with your governments. And Laurent, you alluded to that in the final section of your presentation. We're not yet at the point where all governments would be working from this common methodology, but we have the power to change it. So please share it today with your government counterparts. Make sure that it's on the radar for your national bodies, for the officials that govern hydrogen within your governmental organizations. Ask them to use it. Ask them to use it today. Ask them to get back to us with any questions. Make sure that we are really taking them on that journey starting today. And then the last thing, really amplify it, speak about it, share the information with the full hydrogen ecosystem, because only when it becomes part of the present day of every day, then it becomes common knowledge and a common reference point. So on behalf of the global industry, all I can say is that indeed, thank you again for all the hard work that's gotten us here. We know that this is a milestone on a journey, not the end of the journey, but we believe strongly that through continued collaboration between the Hydrogen Council, ISO, UNIDO, IPHE, and many other key organizations in this space, we can continue to establish the foundation that we need to see. And as we said earlier, let's get involved. Let's shape what comes next. Laurent, thank you again for the kind invitation to join you as you shape the other -X parts of this series. It's really, really important. There's some very important work on the horizon. And I want to reiterate to everyone that this is an open door. Your organizations are welcome to provide input, welcome to shape these key puzzle pieces together. And if you don't know where to start, simply reach out, whether it's ourselves, whether it's ISO, whether it's Laurent, anyone on this webinar. We will be very happy to point you in the right direction. And if your organization, because I see a few well-known names here on this webinar, is a member of the Hydrogen Council, please be in touch. We would be delighted to navigate the next steps together and again make sure that you have all the right information. So to conclude, thank you. This is transformative. This creates trust. But in the spirit of the T's, there's still quite some to-dos. So let's take those actions together and let's put this important document to work. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for those encouraging words. As you said, there is still work to be done, and it is the first real stepping stone, but it's really exciting to feel that momentum gaining, especially when these topics cross all the segments of the ecosystem. So moving from the industry perspective to the country perspective, I'm excited to hand over to our final speaker, Cristian Sampaio, coordinator of subgroup 5 on low emission hydrogen environmental certification at AMP Brazil. And as we all know, Brazil has been an important first mover on operationalizing emissions methodology at the national level. So Cristian, I hand over to you to share the perspective from Brazil. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I thank UNIDO and IPHE for the invitation. It's possible to see my slide?
Yes, perfectly, and we hear you perfectly.
Okay. It's a great pleasure to present the advances in Brazil related to the implementation of low carbon hydrogen regulation. Brazil has made progress in the development of low carbon hydrogen. Its regulatory framework was established by the laws 14,948 and 40,909 of the same year. Sorry, it's not. Okay. Some of their main objectives are to promote low carbon hydrogen economy, encourage investment and research and development, foster market development, integrate Brazil into global value chains, and support climate goals and decarbonizations. Some instruments of the National Low Carbon Hydrogen Policy are the National Hydrogen Program and the Low Carbon Hydrogen Development Program and the Brazilian Hydrogen Certification System. The law established guidelines for the creation of the Brazilian Hydrogen Certification System, for which ANP, the National Agency of Petroleum, Natural Gas and Biofuels, will be responsible for this system, among other responsibilities such as authorization of production plants and etc. The system must be built respecting some premises such as certifies hydrogen based on carbon intensity, ensures traceability and reliability, aligns with international standards, and supports domestic and export markets. Well, in this context, we have the development of a robust low-carbon hydrogen certification program in Brazil requires internationally recognized methodologies that ensure transparency, reliability, and compatibility with global markets. In this context, ISO 19870 represents an important step towards establishing a credible framework for assessing greenhouse gas emissions associated with hydrogen production and its derivatives throughout the life cycle. Its adoption can support Brazil in development a certification system aligned with the international expectations, facilitating the recognition of Brazil low carbon hydrogen in markets with strict sustainability requirements. In this progress, the Brazilian Association of Technical Standards, ABNT, plays a strategic role by supporting the national adoption and development of technical standards compatible with international reference. One of the relevant actions is the participation of ANP in ABNT's special commission for studies dedicated to hydrogen-related standards. This participation contributes to discussions regarding the adoption of ISO 19870 in its application with the Brazilian context. Additionally, ANP will promote next week a workshop bringing together key stakeholders involved in the certification ecosystem, including the accreditation body, certification bodies, and other relevant institutions. The objective is to disseminate knowledge about ISO, discuss its potential application in Brazil, and collect contributions from stakeholders regarding their understanding and perspectives on the standard. Well, as conclusions, I can mention that Brazil is at a key moment for the development of its low-carbon hydrogen value chain. The adoption of ISO can support this process by promoting harmonization, increasing confidence, and facilitating Brazil recognition in international markets, strengthening its competitiveness in the global hydrogen economy. Thank you for your attention, and please feel free to ask any questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Christian, for sharing that with us. And I'm sure many of us are really excited to see and hear how the ISO has already got an example of being adopted. So many thanks. We now move into our guided Q&A segment and the full Q&A segment of the workshop, where I will hand over the rest of this to my fantastic colleague, Gabriel Lasserie Rocha da Silva, who has been a vital member in delivering this ISO. So many of you might know him already. Gabriel will go through a set of the most common questions relating to the ISO, drawing on the themes raised today. And after that, we will open the floor to questions from the audience. So please do put your questions either in the chat or the Q&A function, and we will try to answer as many of those as possible. So please, to the much more capable and expert colleague, Gabriel, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Harley, for such warm introductions. I'm very happy to moderate this section. Actually, the ISO 19870 is very dear to me. I was the project leader for the 19870-1, but also the TS with Laurent as the convener. So when it was actually released in April, it was a very good moment for us, just like it was when the TS was launched. So I think that when we were developing it, we knew that it was crucial to the industry. We knew the pressure for it to be released, and now that it's finally out and governments are starting to adopt it, I think it's like winning a championship. So I do have some questions here, and some of them are more technical, some of them are more general questions. I wanted to bring a pool of different questions for a diverse audience, but I'm also happy that we do have many questions in the queue, frequently asked questions tool here on Teams. So I think that we will have a very nice Q&A session ahead of us. So I just want to start with this one. Well, the 19870-1 is out now. It is an international standard. It is replacing the technical specification, the TS 19870. So I'd like to start asking Laurent, what has changed from one to the other, like in general terms, and which one should we use?
Yes, Gabriel. I think the second question is very easy. Now you have to refer to the ISO IS 19870-1. And as mentioned, normally by this fall, we should have -3, -2, -4. And so I think more or less now you should really forget referring to the ISO TS, but refer only to the ISO IS. I think it was the same when we developed the IPHE guideline. When the ISO TS was published, we also said, please now refer to the ISO TS and no more to IPHE guideline. I think, so this is quite clear. Please now use and refer only to the ISO IS. For the first question, what are the main differences? I would say we introduced different annexes. The first annex on purity, it was not as clearly mentioned how to proceed when you need to take into account impurities in hydrogen. And we could also agree on the value of purity, and we agreed on 99.9, but we may discuss that after the Q&A because the question on that, mole percent. We have a specific annex on feedstock. So we tried between the TS and the IS to distinguish the production pathways from the feedstocks used for these different production pathways in order to ensure harmonization between the different production pathways, because in the previous one, we sometimes it was not always 100% aligned with the feedstock used for different production pathways. And maybe the most important one is we could agree on the allocation method. So, and this was not defined in the previous TS. All the annexes were informative, seen, but now we could agree on this allocation method to be used for each of the pathways. And this is for me mainly the main difference. Whereas I would say introduction of attributional consequential was already there. But now we provided some examples of using consequential approach. And all the consequential approaches are informative, but we have included some examples in order to provide some guidelines, some explanation, what it is and how you can apply it. So these, I would say, are the main differences.
Yeah, that's great. So, yeah, go ahead.
No, please. No, please.
So, the IS, the international standard, is a document with much more consensus than a technical specification, right? So the goal of the international standard is to come out with a higher level of consensus, whereas the TS is a document still under development. So can we say that the IS is a document that is much more ready for the public to use than the TS?
Yes, I hope so, at least, and that the readers and the users will have to define. But what we can say, as mentioned, real consensus, because you know that in the working group we are more than 100 experts from, I think, 16 countries. That you have seen the different steps. We had technical specification, committee draft CD, draft international standard, final draft international standard, and for each of these steps, there was a ballot, there were comments, and usually we had between 200 and 400 comments to discuss, and we went one by one, all the comments. Agreed, disagreed, agreed in principle. So non-comments was forgotten. And that's why at the end, yes, we can really say we achieved a great consensus, because at the end, for the final, the DIS ballot, we had 100% votes positive. 0 vote negative. So, which means that yes, we could reach a consensus. And after reading, commenting, precising, where it was not very clearly stated in the document, I hope that now, yes, it should be easier or less difficult to be applied by the users. But I would say we will be more than happy to receive comments from users telling, here are the next improvements you will do at the next revision phase.
Perfect. So you all have heard here that we should stop using the ISO TS 19870 and the IPHE methodology, stop referring to it, and start referring to the ISO 19870-1. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay,
exactly.
perfect.
For production, for production gate, which is
Yes.
which is I would say maybe the most important one, as many I would say regulations are referring to the production gate, which is usually gate instead, but meaning production gate. But not always, not everywhere, but mostly.
That's perfect. So we do have a similar question than the one that has been submitted to the Q&A, which is about the thresholds and labeling. So the standard does not define any threshold, nor it defines in labeling. And we do have a very good reasoning about that, but would you care to explain to the audience?
This voluntary technical standards is a methodology. And the methodology has not to provide any quantitative thresholds. And as we know, there are different thresholds defined over the world. But this is in the remit of governments, of regulations, to define what are the thresholds to be used to quantify one, hydrogen as low emissions, as renewable, as low carbon. But this is absolutely not the scope and the target of this methodology. The target of this methodology, of this standard, is to agree on how to quantify the carbon footprint. And after, it's up to the regulators to define what is the value used as threshold for different type of hydrogen. So I think that's clear. I know it was at the beginning, even from the TS, many questions were on that. We received many comments that we should have a value, but as explained, it's only a methodology.
Yes, and I think it was in Korea last year or the year before that Guy and yourself presented a very good analogy with a transit radar and a police officer and a speed limit. I think it helps illustrate to the general public what is the role of a standards and the role of national regulation and the public authority. So could you maybe give some words on that?
Yes. I think nobody likes to have some speed ticket, but you may have already received some, or you may receive in the future. But I would say you can compare. The regulation is defining the speed over which you will receive a speed ticket. It can be 50 kilometers per hour, 90, 130 or 10. But the law is defining the speed limit. But after you, how to measure? You have some radar. And then you have to ensure that the value provided, given by the radar, is the right one. And this is exactly, I would say, what the ISO standard is doing. He's telling how you have to do to take your measure. But the value which is measured, and if it is over or below this threshold, is not in the remit of how to use the radar. And this is exactly an analogy between the ISO standard here for hydrogen and, as you mentioned, this radar to receive or not a speed ticket.
That's great. And since now that we are talking about those thresholds, well, the standards quantifies the kilogram of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of hydrogen. But then you mentioned in your speech that there's hydrogen, the word hydrogen, but there's also the H2. So why is there this difference in the standard, and why is it so important?
We said it's important because when you say H2, we think it's molecular hydrogen. But we also know that when you are producing hydrogen, you have some impurities. And then depending on the quality of your hydrogen, you can say that finally the value of the CO2 equivalent can be, I would say, a wrong value. Because if you may have some impurities like CO2 or other species, which may be emitting by using this product some greenhouse gas, in fact, you say I have a value of 2, but in fact, regarding the quality of hydrogen, it could be 2.1, 2.2, 2.4. And that's why we didn't want to bias this value. And that's why we say that, yes, we need to really differentiate the molecule from the product. But that's why we also need to agree on what is the threshold to be considered as pure hydrogen. And then we decided to use this 99.9 by telling that if you have 0.1% of impurities, it will not drastically impact the value, the real value of the greenhouse gas emissions. And so not to bias, I would say, if you are below or over regulatory thresholds. So that's why we specify this specific Annex A in this IS now, as it was not really as clear in the TS.
That's great. Thank you so much. Do we still have Ivana here with us?
My apologies. Yes, I'm still here, just switching between platforms. So
thank you so much, and sorry for calling you out
no
of
worries
nowhere.
at all.
I just wanted to ask a question. Since many of the Hydrogen Council members, they are some of the key players in the global economy, the global hydrogen economy, but also in the other derivatives. Do you have like a thermometer or something of the sort about discussions on using the ISO standard? And I believe that many of them are still talking about the TS, but maybe regarding the IS as well. Some discussions that are ongoing on how they view the newly released standard.
So, Gabriel, this is a super timely question, and Laurent will testify. We just had actually our own webinar for Hydrogen Council members just yesterday. The participation was excellent, lots of good questions, continued interest, and look, at the council, we've taken a long-term view on the importance of standards. As Laurent put it, we're in the business of calculating, in the business of facts and figures, and for us the standards are really absolutely fundamental. So the thermometer is showing high, good warmth. That's how I would put it from the industry. And look, what I think is really key is the collaboration in the preparation of the standards, the fact that it's a very inclusive process with those open doors where all stakeholders can truly participate, and we put forward our best thinking together and then align on that methodology together. I think that's key. And because it is working that way, because the industry has been heard, has been able to contribute, that's why it's also warmly welcome when we have the outcome. So again, a huge thanks from our side. I think the webinar where Laurent participated yesterday and delivered a similar presentation to our members made that message be very, very clear.
Thank you very much. It's great to know how the industry is looking at it, and it's great to know that it's warm. So
almost as warm as it is in Germany as we speak.
Oh, so I think that we changed weathers because it's very cold in Brazil right now, at least in here in Rio.
We've switched.
So going to a more technical question, Lohan, I know that we have received, well, actually we have received more than 1,000 comments. I should say in all of the rounds, but we have received many comments about the hydrogen releases regarding if they are accounted for in the methodology. And I should say yes, but please just explain to everyone how is it accounted for.
Yes, thank you for the question. Maybe, yes, I should have focused on the metrics. When we are telling what is the carbon footprint of the hydrogen produced, it is the total greenhouse gas emission divided by the mass of hydrogen delivered. So which means that if you have any leakages all along your production pathway, of course, it means that you may have produced emitted greenhouse gases in different steps of the process. So if you have a value X, and you say, I have produced originally 1,000 kilograms of hydrogen, but what is delivered at the production gate, if it is only 900 kilograms, means that you will divide your greenhouse gas emissions quantity not by 1,000, but by 900, which means that mechanically, all hydrogen leakages will increase the carbon footprint of the hydrogen delivered. So in that sense, I would say we are taking account about the hydrogen leakage by increasing the carbon footprint of the hydrogen delivered. So this is different from taking into account the impact of the hydrogen in the atmosphere. But at least from the carbon footprint point of view, yes, we are considering any leakages along the production pathway.
That's great. Thank you. We do have an additional question on that, which I'll come back later in the open Q&A. Before we wrap up this guided Q&A, I would like to ask one more question regarding the next steps. So you mentioned the -2, -3, and -4. So they are regarding the transport of ammonia, liquid hydrogen, and liquid organic hydrogen carriers up to the consumption gauge. And what can we expect about when can we expect that then they should be released?
So as mentioned, we hope, but this is not only in our hands, because now it's mainly also the work of the ISO Secretariat to work on the documents. So we hope that we will have the final draft international standard, I would say by July, and then to launch the ballot. It's an 8-week ballot, 2 months, which means that by September, October, and then we will only receive technical editorial comments, which means that once the FDIS is published and is, I would say, available on the ISO website. So many of you may say, yes, unfortunately, but I have to pay for it. Yes, it is unfortunate, but I can just tell you, but even we as convener, project leader or contributor, we have to pay for our own document. So it is accessible, which means that even if you want to have access to the technical content of these three standards, it should be available maybe by July or August, and then usually ISO then takes into account all the editorial comments, and after 4 to 6 weeks, publish the EIS. So that's why I was mentioning that we can expect to have the three standards by September, October. And so it might be great, in particular regarding this H2 pass we are mentioning from the beginning, that I would say the objective we had to have the ISO standard series published by COP31 should be achieved.
That's a very major milestone. So a very last question before we open the Q&A for ANP and Cristiane Sampaio. I know that ANP has been working very hard in capacity building for adopting the 19870. So can you give us some more words about this process?
Yes, Gabriel, we are organizing the workshop that I have mentioned next week, and it will be a great opportunity to talk with a lot of stakeholders. We will have the presence of the Ministry of Mines and Energy, that is the responsible for the national low carbon hydrogen policy here in Brazil. And we will have also the presence of a national accrediting body, the INMETRO, that is INMETRO, as well as certification bodies. So I'm sure that we will have a good opportunity to talk with all the stakeholders. And after this workshop, we're sure we will have concrete actions. Certainly, we will have emerged actions for capacitation and so on to construct all the framework necessary to develop the low carbon hydrogen in Brazil.
Thank you very much, Cristiane. And ANP is also part of the Special Commission Studies for Hydrogen Technologies in ABNT, which is the national standards body in Brazil, and they have been instrumental in helping create and help transform the TS, the 19870 series into a Brazilian standards. Okay, so I think that now we can open Thank you. Now we can open the Q&A, and as I mentioned, we do have many questions, which is very, very good. Thank you so much for that. So I will try to pick some questions with different topics. I think that the first one that we can get a further clarification on, and I will try to pronounce those names, and I apologize beforehand because I know that I'll mispronounce some of them. But it's from Varshita Selapa. Regarding the system boundaries for the different standards. So I think it goes to you, Lohan. We have the -1, 2, 3, and 4. What's the difference from the system boundary? Where do they start and where do they finish?
So I think if you look at the standard, we are proposing for each of the production pathways a figure defining the system boundary for each of these different production pathways. So I think it really depends on I would say, the production pathway. But I would say, generally speaking, the system boundary of the product is, of course, you need to include all the core process of your production pathway. And then you have some inputs, which can be electricity, heat, water, or other feedstocks, coal, gas, whatever. These are inputs, and each of these inputs have an emission factor. Then you have your description of the process, and then you have outputs. And outputs we are designing either, of course, co-products. Hydrogen is one of the co-products, but there are some other co-products. There are some waste also to be considered. And so I would say, To define the different system boundary, please have a look. It is defined by a figure in the ISO standard. So I don't know if it really answers the question, but for me it's quite difficult to tell you. But we tried to include all the inputs and all the potential outputs, and then to have a description of, I would say, the most common production process regarding the specific production pathway. So these are examples, but then of course we know that even for SMR, you may have different processes depending on your own process design. But we provided, I would say, the most common one, and now it's up to each of the users to apply his own process and his own design.
And I think that for everyone that is used to the TS or the IPHE methodology, they will be very glad to see this new picture because it's very detailed, right? So we did have some system boundaries in a figure in the TS, but this one it does have the many of the sub processes, so the detailing is very good. I think they will be very happy.
And maybe just to add, of course, as it is mentioned, but that's right for everyone, you have to describe as precise as possible and to justify your choices. And this is, I would say, common to any LCA approach.
Of course. So since we're talking about the system boundary, there's the second question, and I think the answer will go through the same way, which is from Harshil Desai. How would the accounting work in the case of CCU-based hydrogen derivative, and especially in relation to the source of CO2? And by that, I'm understanding maybe biogenic CO2 as well.
So here regarding CCU, as mentioned, here it depends on the approach we are using, either if it is attributional or consequential. If it is purely attributional, CCU, you are storing your CO2, which means hydrogen, CO2 has not been emitted, and it is considered as a co-product. But depending on what you are applying this standard, you may have to use also, for instance, if you want to produce e-fuels, then you have to extend the system boundary beyond the pure, I would say, system boundary of the product. And then how this CO2 is allocated will mainly depend also on the regulation to which you are referring to. So this is the way we were handling, and we are not considering any CO2 credits in this standard. This is also outside a pure methodology.
Thank you, Laurent. So going back to the question, the very last question that they asked about the hydrogen emissions, we do have some complementary questions here in this matter, which are, does the standard account for hydrogen being emitted as a greenhouse gas or with a significant GWP? And there's also these hydrogen leakages and / emissions, but also regarding the other emissions such as methane emissions, which I think the answer is much more clear, yes.
Yes, so that's a usual question that we discussed many times in the working group. First, hydrogen is not a greenhouse gas.
So sorry, let me just speak the names of the people asking. So the first one was Thomas Gibbon, and the second one was Al-Katani Ahmed.
So hydrogen is not a greenhouse gas. So that's why we cannot consider hydrogen into the CO2 equivalent equation. And what has been decided is that we are using the latest assessment report equation agreed by the UNFCCC. And this is today the RAR5. And so, which means that CO2 equivalent is CO2 plus 28 CH4 plus 265 N2O. And that's it. So that's why shouldn't we add hydrogen, which is not recognized in any documents today, as it has a GWP, but has many species which are really listed in the IPCC reports. But these reports, I would say these tables, are not so far included in the UNFCCC. So that's why we are not using this GWP of hydrogen. If it will change in the future, then of course, then we will have to change also, because as we said in the ISO standard, that we will refer to the latest recognized equation from the UNFCCC. So that's for hydrogen. And maybe as a side answer regarding that topic, I know there are a lot of noise regarding the impact of hydrogen on the climate change, but you need, as usual, to have a full picture. So what is the share of the hydrogen releases from the hydrogen industry versus the total hydrogen emissions production in the atmosphere? It is estimated today about 8%. So maybe we should focus on the 92 other percent than only to focus on these 8%. So this is just, I would say, a side comment. Yes, but that doesn't mean that the industry will not reduce as much as possible any hydrogen leakages, not only because of the climate impact, but because of cost and because of safety. So I think it is already considered by the hydrogen industry. So regarding methane, here methane is a greenhouse gas. So that's why we really have to account for methane emissions as precisely as possible. And we also had a lot of discussions, good comments, even from some NGOs. And that's why we moved from what might be the emission factors you may use, and that was in the TS. There was no priority order. There were 3 bullet points. And now we agreed to put a priority order I was mentioning before. First, to use the emission factor of the natural gas from the well the natural gas has been extracted. If not available, of the value of the basin of that well. And only if not available, and justify why it is not available, then to use the national average value. And all these values have to be accredited, auditable, and so checked and as trust value. So yes, we took, I would say, a special care to account as much as possible for any methane emissions.
Yeah. So just to make it clear to the asker, yes, they are being accounted for, and yes, there is a very good detailed step-by-step on how to account for those methane emissions. They were a very important part of the discussions that we had.
Yes.
So I will try to combine 2 different questions here, and one of them you have answered already, which is from Hashir Desai. Why was the methanol pathway not considered for the standard as a hydrogen derivative? And the second one from Elijah Ugaden. So the ISO standard defines specific pathways for hydrogen production. In your opinion, if the process is not listed in one of those, it's not in the annex, can the standards still be applied?
So for the second question, if your process is not listed, of course, I would say it depends on the process. I don't know if it is easily comparable to any of the 9 production pathways considered. Then you may just, I would say, apply the nearest one, the closest production pathway, if it is relevant. And regarding methanol, the answer is just very easy because nobody proposed to work on it. So that's why I was just quoting from the beginning that if any industry, any actor would like to consider methanol, please just make a proposal that you can submit to your national standardization body, and then we will have a ballot within this ISO TC197 subcommittee 1. And if there are at least 5 positive votes with at least 5 experts from 5 members, then we will start a new working group dealing with methanol. So we hope that our next plenary meeting will be early December. And I know that at least one country is considering to make a proposal in December at the next plenary meeting. And so I can just encourage maybe an industry interested in, please, if you are not member of this ISO TC 197 subcommittee 1, please enter, ask to become a member of this subcommittee 1, and then to support the proposal which might be made by by an ISO member. And once we have it, of course, we will use the same structure of the other annexes. And I think it could be developed quite fast. as we are starting not from scratch, but we already have a nice, I would say, agenda outlined of the documents. And so I think within 1 or 2 years, we should have the standard ready.
It's great. So we do have another question here, and this one is regarding the alignment with this ISO standard with already existing regulations. But also, I will try to combine, as I have been doing, with another question that asks about the assessment of electricity. So the first one is from Eleonora Moro, that says that it was mentioned that the ISO standard is mostly aligned with the RED 3 Delegated Act. And what are the areas that it is aligned and where it's not aligned, and how do they are expected to interact with each other? But the second one is regarding the emissions for electricity, and from Alejandro Bloch, he mentioned electrolysis. If there are any other criteria, such as additionality or renewable energy, the need to be renewable energy, for example.
So the last example is just one point where I would say there is a difference between the European Delegated Act and the ISO standard. It was also discussed many times. I would say to include any additionality, temporal, geographical criteria is outside the methodology. By applying this may impact the emission factor of the electricity you are using. And so you have then to use the corresponding emission factor of this electricity, but the methodology will remain the same. So that's why, as I would say, all these criteria are not applied everywhere. So we could not apply it to the ISO standard. So that's why we have to be as neutral and generic as possible. But as mentioned, yes, if you have any constraints, any criteria, it may change the emission factor of electricity, which means the input value you are using for the standard will be different, and which means that the output will also be affected by applying or not these criteria, but not within, I would say, not as one building block of the ISO standard. And then another difference was also on the allocation, as mentioned in the Delegated Act, the European Delegated Act, if I'm not misleading, that of course use first energy content, and if energy content is not applicable, then use economic value. And in our ISO standard, we say no, first use other physical allocation like mass, mole, or even for steam enthalpy. And even you will see that in some coming standards, we are even using exergy, which is quite brand new. And we say we only use economic allocation if we cannot find another way. And why? In particular, one of the main reasons was, first, there is no, I would say, global hydrogen market price. So what value are you using? And secondly, to use an economical value to receive or not, I would say, grants, subsidies, is not, could lead to some conflict of interest. So that's why we say you cannot enter this circle to use arbitrary economical value to receive or not funds. So that's why we say, please, let's only keep it as a final solution if the others could not be applied.
Great. And since we were talking about electricity, there's a question mentioning if there's a the hierarchy between using the market-based approach or location-based approach for electricity?
No, I think we let it open.
So we are approaching the final moments for our webinar. There's one question here that I would like to leave it more as a recommendation, which is if the standard is technology neutral and we're trying to build this market, why some markets still insist on some terminologies that may not be as technology neutral. I think this is one of the points that you mentioned right at the beginning of your presentation. So if you want to give some final words about this before we wrap up.
Please, can you just repeat, because I didn't really get you?
Yeah, so if the standard is technology neutral and we're trying to build a market that is low emissions, why some markets still insist on some specific terminology that may not be as neutral.
I don't know how to answer, but I would say we are working on a methodology. After you may apply the technology you want. We need to be technology neutral. We need to support a level playing field. And so that's why we should not favor one technology more than any other.
Well, thank you so much. I think this was a very good closing sentence. And with that, we wrap up this this meeting for today, for this webinar. And thank you all for being here, and thank you all for your time and your question, and for the speakers for the depth of the presentation interventions. We do have an updated Q&A coming up soon, which should have some more information and should ask some more questions that we didn't have the time to answer today. So again, thank you for your time, and we look forward to connecting again. See you all.